Welcome to the Livestock Podcast, sponsored by the University of Tennessee Beef and Forage Center. I'm Bruno Pedreira, the Center Director and the Extension Forage Specialist with the University of Tennessee. Joined today by Dr. Katie Mason, our University of Tennessee Beef and Cattle Specialist. How are you doing today, Dr. Mason?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here at work for a little while. I've been traveling a lot, so good day for a podcast.
That's good. That's what we do, right? All the time we are on the road. Today, I'm very thrilled that we have here Dr. Justin Rhinehart, Interim Dean for Extension at the University of Tennessee. Dr. Rhinehart, how are you doing today?
Bruno, I'm happier than ever.
Awesome. You see, he's happier than ever here with us today. That's what we want on this podcast, man, is to have fun and to show our farmers what we do at the University of Tennessee. Justin, I'll call you Justin, man.
Please.
You know that I have problems with your last name. You're always speaking on me. So I'll call you Justin. Let's make it easy for all of us.
Right.
Can you start sharing a little bit of your personal and academic journey, that led you where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Be glad to. I'm glad to finally be on here. I know we've been trying to coordinate a time for me here to be here with you, and I've been watching. So
getting our schedule is not easy, man.
It's not easy. Some of that's having a lot to do, and some of it's just time management on my part. But anyway, glad to be here at this point. And glad to do this. You guys are doing a great job, and really excited to be a part of this now. So my kind of personal background, I'll run through it quickly. Maybe if there's anything you want to know more specifically about, be glad to add to it. But so I'm an East Tennessee guy, born and raised. Actually did my undergraduate here at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And I did it actually in ag education. So at the time it was called ag and extension education. Now it's ag leadership, education, and communication, or what we normally call our ALEC department. So my dad was my high school ag teacher, and I was very involved in FFA, did a lot of stuff, with FFA even before I was old enough to be in it, just because my dad was the advisor, and had an agriculture class every year in high school, and thought I wanted to be a high school ag teacher. So I came here to UT and studied that. In the meantime, two things. I decided that high school ag teacher was not going to be the career for me. I found that out when I student taught. Bless the folks that do, and it's a very important career, and I'm glad folks do it. It just wasn't going to be my calling. But about the same time, most of the classes that I took outside the core curriculum for ag and extension education were in animal science. That's kind of the background I came from. And one, or I should say, it's the background I wanted to study. My family also had a nursery and greenhouses growing up, so got a good dose of horticulture during my younger years. But decided to go the animal science route. That's really always been my passion. So after I graduated in 1999 with my undergraduate degree, I actually came back here a semester and took things like biochemistry, statistics, all in one semester. To be prepared to go to graduate school. And I'd already been talking to the professor I was going to do my master's with at Kentucky, but needed those things that I didn't get because I didn't actually have an animal science degree. So got that done, started at the University of Kentucky, did my master's there with an extension specialist named Les Anderson. Les and I traveled all over the state of Kentucky, doing a lot of what I tend to call translational research and reproductive management, did a lot of embryo transfer. There wasn't any IVF going on at the time. I was a little ahead of that, showing my years now, I guess, Katie. But ultrasound, estrus synchronization, timed AI, a lot of those kinds of things, applied reproductive technologies that we had at the time, trying to develop those further and demonstrate how to use those.
That's great.
So really had a passion then at that point for being an extension beef cattle specialist that specifically did reproduction. Told Dr. Anderson that, and he said, well, good luck. There's just a handful of us across the whole country. And, but I decided that's what I wanted to do. So had an opportunity then to further my education in more of the basic sciences. I knew that I needed to understand basic science more in depth if I wanted to be able to translate it to people that didn't study it. So I ended up at West Virginia University, got my PhD there with, most of the work I did was in their animal science department, but the degree is from the faculty of reproductive biology. So worked a lot in the med school biology department, did some basic work on the endocrinology of pregnancy loss and pregnancy maintenance, placentation, a little bit with FSH with protein hormone isoforms and binding affinity. Some of those, again, just some basic science that I was able to get some bench top research experience and really, really enjoyed that. And could have very well done, had a career in that, but I really enjoyed being with farmers and translating and seeing them have success with the new technologies that were coming out. So from there, had the great fortune of skipping the whole postdoc and everything and went directly into a faculty position at Mississippi State University in their animal and dairy science department, and was there for a few years before I had the opportunity to come back to Tennessee and take a faculty position in the animal science department at UT in April of 2010.
Yeah.
So that's the quick version.
Yeah. No, that's great. As a beef cattle specialist. At
Exactly.
that point, right?
And focusing specifically in reproduction. Now, the way we did it at the time, and it's kind of different now, maybe, Katie, but I was in Middle Tennessee at the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center is where my office was. So I wasn't here on campus. So in that area and West Tennessee, I covered a lot of just general beef cattle production topics as a specialist, serving the agents with what they needed. But then across the entire state as on questions relating specifically to reproductive management.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So thinking about your time as a specialist, you don't have to think back too far. Right?
No.
You were still a specialist when I got here in 2020. So, we as a group of beef and forage specialists often try to kind of boil our programs down to one or two management practices that we think people often overlook or that are really the key kind of to their success. So what would you say that is in terms of reproductive management?
Yeah. And you're hedging a little bit on this because the world that's going to be listening to this, we all have our little catchphrases, right? And it's the one thing that are the central theme of what we do. And for mine, it was have a defined calving season and as tight as you can get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I have test your hay or read the label or read the feed tag or whatever. So I think that we take those messages, and even as a nutrition person or a forages person, we can see the importance of having that calving season and how that works, as far as whole farm success and profitability.
And I kind of call it the gateway to doing everything else right. Yeah, you can manage forages a lot more effectively if you can graze everything and at the same production cycle in one pasture. You don't have a dry cow in the same pasture as a cow with a 5-month-old calf and a newborn, another cow with a newborn. So health, any kind of nutrition, forages. I really feel like and I would say this, just kind of make myself feel better as a repro guy, that having a defined calving season is the gateway to doing everything else right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that brings us to this system view, right? The system perspective, to try to understand the farm as a whole thing. That's what we have been discussing in this podcast here a lot. And I heard that while you were a specialist, you used to use a lot the analogy with the cattle production be something more like in the finite or the infinite game.
Yeah.
What exactly is this? How do you handle this with farmers?
So I need to tell a little bit of a story even before I get into that. So for the last probably 5 or 6 years that I operated as a specialist, I kind of tried to act like I was also an economist. Now I have no actual training as an economist other than what I've read and listened to myself, and just try to pick up on. And but I would give our ag econ guys a hard time about me being an econ groupie or something like that. So that the idea, and when I would give talks as an extension specialist, I'd talk about playing the long game and just basically having a view of the horizon beyond this year. But we tend to talk about everything we do in beef cattle production about this year. Part of it's because taxes kind of restrain us into a year. The calendar year and the weather cycles. We just, for good reason, we think and talk about years a lot. But what we do, hopefully, and for the farmers that we work for, hopefully they do it for a lifetime, right? And not just 1 year at a time. So that's where the idea came in. And I, again, kind of got off on this tangent of looking at economics and really more just decision making, not economics as math with letters in it, as the microeconomists do, but more macroeconomics and decision making kind of tools. So it really comes from a discipline called game theory that some people would say originated in economics. It's mathematics, it's everything really, but it's game theory is about decision making. And so within that, and where I actually found this, the way I stumbled on to studying it a little bit more was from a leadership speaker named Simon Sinek, and I found one of his YouTube videos, and he was talking about the imbalance of having an infinite player in a finite game or a finite player in an infinite game. So the way he explains that, and I'll try to kind of boil this down so we can get back talking about how it applies to cattle. But a finite game is going to be something like an athletic event. You take football, you have two teams that are opposing each other within a defined amount of time. The rules are stable. The players, I mean, you can go in and out, but the players on each sideline are the same ones you start with, same ones you end with, barring injury and those kinds of things. But everything is defined, and you have at the end of that defined period of time a winner and a loser. And an infinite game is more that you don't have as much stability. The rules change, the players change, everything changes. Yeah. And so you're not playing to win that game, you're playing to stay in that game.
Okay.
And so if you're a finite player in an infinite game, you're going to eventually run out of resources or just the will to stay in that game. And
there is no end. Yeah.
Right. But if you're an infinite player in an infinite game, you understand that what you're doing is to be in the game for as long as you can, and you're looking at a longer horizon than year over year. And so when I would talk about management practices in beef cattle reproductive management that would kind of go against the rules of thumb that a lot of people had developed, or sounded even a little bit crazy to folks when you would say it, when you take a broader view of things and a broader scale. And oftentimes I would say, I'm not talking about this decision so that you'll have heavier average weaning weights at the end of this year. I'm talking about making this decision so that you can set yourself up to hand this herd of cows and this piece of land over to your kids or grandkids. It's just a different scale of time, different horizon that you're looking at.
Yeah, looking for a different perspective.
So that's my very rough pretend like economist application of game theory to beef cattle reproductive.
You sound like most economists I've talked to.
So right. Just using a lot of words. Right?
That's right. Yeah. And that, just to bring up another point, you're talking about handing, the farm off to your grandkids or kids or whatever it is, when we talk about sustainability too, and that's not just environmental. And I think a lot of us get hung up on that piece of it, but being sustainable as a farm and being able to from an economic standpoint, but also
pay the bills.
The farm sustaining, itself over time and lasting for a long time. Yeah. I think that connection is important too.
And I've often looked at it, or I guess I should say more recently looked at it from the complete reverse of it. So if you hear, somebody that's really worried, and rightfully so, about the environment, so they're rightfully concerned about the environment, but sometimes the application of that and thinking that farmers in general, or beef cattle producers specifically that we're talking about, thinking that they harm the environment, that's probably a misapplication of those concerns, right? So if they're really concerned about the environment, you would eventually come to the realization that farmers in general are the ultimate, stewards of that. Yeah. And they're the ones that want to sustain and maintain or even improve that environment so that they can stay in business and have that
being
down
impacted
generations.
by.
Yeah. And so that, if somebody's really worried about environmental sustainability, I would encourage them to look at trying to help farmers be economically sustainable, right, so that they can keep being stewards of that land for a longer period of time.
And that's a really nice conversation, because, and I like to feel that every time we are talking with farmers like this, we are not talking with someone that's there for a such period of time and it has an end, right? I am the 5th generation livestock farmers myself. So every time you talk with farmers, they are there for 2, 3, 4, 10 generations. How can we see this in a long term, and not just thinking how I'm going to pay my bills today, but how I'm going to pay then, and build a system that's going to be sustainable and profitable and it's going to be able to be there for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, right? Thinking for this perspective, pulling you back a little bit from the repro side of this conversation. one of the things that we discussed a lot last year, the last 2 years, Katie and I have been discussing a lot of the drought during the fall, for example. One of the things I think we have a hard time is to sell animals, right? The livestock guy, and I include myself on this, we like to have the herd and increase the number of animals you have it. What is the role, for example, and the cost of open replacement heifers, for example, impacting these long-term view, and how can I keep myself into the game and look at my herd in a different way that I can make for the next generation?
Sure. It's one of the problems I always have with a question like that is my mind's going 1,000 different ways because there's all these examples I want to give and there's so much I want to get. Let me see if I can try to, and so the art of being a good extension educator, right, is boiling all that down into a direct answer. I'm going to try to do that. I'm afraid it's not going to come off as well. But so let me go back and talk about this, and I'll try to even weave in the finite versus infinite thing. So a finite player in a given year, let's say you have ample grass, you have the right rain, and your maximum capacity of your land, let's say, is 50 cows. If any little thing goes wrong, though, that 50 cows is going to take some extra resources, or you're going to have to cull down, right? So a finite game would say, I need to run 50 cows and wean a calf from every single one of them and sell the most pounds I can off of this land. So if you take a more infinite game theory approach to that, it might be that, hey, what if I run 40 cows or maybe even 35 cows on this? And after I wean that calf crop, then I stalker them a little bit longer. But if I, don't have the grass available to stalker them longer, I sell them earlier. And that way I don't have to sell out of my good cows. I've taken years to and invested a lot of money. And this kind of gets back to specifically your question on the heifers. I don't have to sell a cow that maybe, I put several $1,000s into that hasn't paid for herself yet. I can sell those calves a little bit earlier, lighter weight, take my legs there, but not have to repopulate. So that's kind of maybe an example of the infinite versus the finite, not just max capacity all the time, trying to go for numbers, but it's, again, playing to stay in the game, right?
Yeah.
But if you relate that back, Bruno, specifically to your question on heifer development, there's a couple, several different ways to look at that. And a lot of, again, work I did with economists in our Ag Econ group here, Andrew Griffith being one of those, more recently, Charlie Martinez, Chris Boyer, those folks. We would look at, what's it cost for you to raise them yourself? And then there's a lot involved in that, right? Too. Do I wean them and just turn them back in with mature cows and hope they get bred, or do I have a separate pasture and a separate sire? What's that cost? Does it pay for me to do it myself? What's the number I need to justify to do it for myself? Or do I find somebody that is doing that at a different economic scale and send my heifers, if I want those genetics, send them to them to be developed and pay them to do that and get them back, before they calve? Or do I just, breed everything terminal and sell all my heifers and buy back bred heifers from somebody else's genetics that I trust? All those are viable options. And I'm going to get into I'm going to give the classic extension example, right?
We boil it down, right?
I'm going to say it right now. It depends.
It depends.
It depends. All those are viable answers.
Sure.
And there's probably many more viable answers depending on what people's objectives are. But, the way I approach heifer development is first start with what the objectives are, and what are you going for? What's the long-term horizon on that? And chances are it's going to be somewhere, if you have enough cows, it's at least going to be managing those heifers separately from weaning until they bred back the second time, or sending them somebody else to develop, or just buying bred heifers.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's young cows. That's really difficult to do probably the last decade. But there was a long period of time when I was younger in this game that sound like an old guy now.
Back in your day.
Back in my day. There was a period of time though you could buy a 3, 4, 5-year-old cow, or a 3-in-1 kind of a package, or a cow that had a calf bred back, that kind of thing, or open even. There was so many options that kind of priced itself out, or there just weren't as many available, so they priced themselves out. So it's been more the first calf heifer kind of an approach, more recently, at least the past 5 years. But a lot of options, a lot of different decisions to be made. But again, it goes back to making those decisions based on what my herd's going to look like 10 years down the road instead of just December 30th.
Yeah. I credit you for not saying it depends from the start, because that's what I was thinking. So, you got to it eventually. But one thing I wanted to mention, you talked about, selecting whether I want to graze 50 cows by maximum or maybe go back and do 40 this year based on my, forages or whatever. But we think about Mott's curve, from a forages standpoint, and there's an optimal point of stocking rate and output per acre. And so, we encourage people choose that optimal. You don't have to maximize output from every animal.
Right.
We want to find that optimal output from my acres. So I think it relates there. But as we start to kind of wrap up and think about the pieces of advice that you have, if you could, I think this is more about changing mindset. So if you want farmers to adopt that long game mindset, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Yeah, and that's really probably the more difficult thing to approach here. And I've never, even though I'll pretend like I'm an economist, I'm not going to pretend like I'm a sociologist.
Right.
But I think it comes down to folks feeling comfortable in what they're doing, and just knowing why they're in the game, I guess. And I referenced Simon Sinek as my introduction to this game theory concept. I've read a lot more and seen a lot more on it since then. But if you use him as an example, he talks about your why.
Yeah.
And to me, it would be, every day. And this kind of goes back, Bruno, to something I missed and didn't address in your question too. And that may be why you're circling me back to answer. Katie, you're pretty good at managing these things. Yeah. So, but, I guess just having in your mind when you wake up every day, and I've got these things I need to get done. And if I can't do this by this certain time, if I can't get to town and get this part for the truck or tractor or whatever, then I'm going to be feeding in the dark. And I mean, it's different when you're doing it every single day.
Sure.
And as an extension specialist, not having heard myself, I always had to keep that in mind. That, I might be driving across the state to go give a talk, but it's totally different for those guys and gals that I'm going to talk to. They had to rush and get stuff done before they get to the extension meeting, or they just knew they were going to be feeding in the dark and it was going to be cold. And
Right.
so I was trying to constantly think about that. And I'm kind of answering this just, from my experience, my perspective. If I came to big cattle producers with my information with that in mind, saying, hey, this isn't gospel. There's only one thing that we're going to build dogma around in this life, or at least from my worldview perspective. And I'm not trying to tell you this is the only way to do it, but I'm going to tell you what I've seen in other places and other people do. I'm going to give you data that comes from other farmers that have actually done this. And so we just talk about it. And I think if everybody can get comfortable about saying, I don't have to have the same or a better average weaning weight than my neighbor. I don't have to run the exact breed composition as my neighbor. If I'm a commercial guy, I don't have to have purebred cows, right? That's another thing we hadn't even gotten
Hot
into.
take.
It's really easy to pick bulls and all that stuff. But anyway, I think it's some of it's a mindset of an individual that you kind of have to get to a certain point too, just in life in general, experience some things to be comfortable saying, yeah, I do it a little bit different, but it fits my objectives, and my objectives don't end when I do my taxes this year. Hopefully it ends generations down the road, if it ends at all. So I'm talking a lot, maybe not directly answering the question, but it really does have to come down to mindset. I think as extension educators, and this is what I think about more so now day to day in this role, is empowering extension educators to think about it that way. We're not going to somebody's farm or to a producer meeting to tell them exactly how to do it and exactly how it has to be. It's, we're here to support you with the information you need. And if I'm not giving you the information you need, let me know, and I'll go find it. And if it's not there, then we'll talk to our colleagues in research about creating it. And we often work together to do that as well. So it's a whole system mindset and human system involved here too. So
yeah. No, and for all who have been a discussion in this podcast here, we always, going back and forth to this extension mindset. Depends is there a lot. I used to say, even if I buy your farm tomorrow, that system is different now, right? Because I'm making decisions with my own story, with my own capability that's different from yours. So every time I visit a farm and we discuss about it, and one of the things I like to say is I like to listen to them, right? And understand why they are doing what they are doing, so we can provide some kind of advice and say, based on what I'm telling you, make your decision, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's hard to tell you what to do and not be there in your scheme the next day.
Yeah. Well, and that's a funny take on it. Maybe I've thought about it this before, but it feels like a new thought. But you know, it would be really easy. We joke about the "it depends" thing.
Mhm.
It would be really easy if I had an exact answer for everything.
Oh,
right? And
yeah,
I used to try to do
absolutely.
that a lot as an extension specialist. Like, how many bulls do I need for per cow or
Mhm.
cow bull to cow ratio? I'd say one for every month I age until they're 3 years old, and then 35 cows per bull, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that'd be nice if I could just say a number like that,
Mhm.
but it's not that easy, right?
Right.
And that's why we have to say it depends. But I think hopefully people understand that when we say it depends, there's a lot more discussion beyond that, so we can get to an answer for you. Maybe it's, you know, it's dangerous to say. Maybe you have a mature bull with a great BSE and high capacity, and you can run him with 45 cows or 50 cows, or you can
Mhm.
even synchronize a set of cows and he can cover them. But I would have to know a lot more
Sure.
about the situation, and that's why I can't just say that one number. It'd make our job a lot easier.
It
but
would, yeah.
People hate to hear
Be out of
it
a job,
depends.
right?
But I
Yeah.
promise you, it's tougher for us to say than it is for us to take.
So, Justin, thank you so much for joining us in this livestock podcast here, sponsored by the University of Tennessee Beef and Forage Center. It was a pleasure to have you here. Hope you guys have enjoyed this conversation here, and you guys come back next month for the next podcast with Dr. Mason and our next guest. Thank you so much.